the other reason that people don't think about is that here is one of the biggest problems with North America versus Europe. So venture capital is funding the vast majority of the North American teams and rosters. Meanwhile, in Europe, there is a lot less venture capital just culturally and financially within that system, not just in esports, but just in general. And what happens is when these teams come in to North America and they buy in and they're funded by these like venture capital behemoths, is that the demand from the top, because remember, these people don't really know anything about esports, is, oh, we got to sign these players with these big followings, or, you know, we're looking to make the immediate splash. Like, we want to get in there and we want to, you know, contend for the title immediately, import all the players or buy out this North American player who's just okay for, you know, $1 million or whatever. That's fine. So they throw around these huge sums of money, but there's never like, no one comes in with a long-term plan. Is the problem in America, is that no one comes in and says, you know what, we're going to build like a really good feeder system to our team. And it doesn't matter if it's going to take 3 years for us to develop this talent. That's going to be our strategy. No, when you see EG enter, they're just like throwing money everywhere. You know what I mean? Or Team Liquid builds their entire fucking brand image about Steve, you know, with a money gun, like shooting it everywhere. You don't see that in Europe. you see teams like Mad Lions, you know, coming in, and granted, they are a North American organization, Mad Lions. They're based in Toronto in Canada, but they come in and they're like, let's actually scout the ladder. Or EU Masters exists, and that doesn't exist in North America, which is, you know, part of the infrastructural issue. But my point is like, these people are just tossing all this money out there, and there's this sense in North American esports, not just in League of Legends, that you have to have immediate success because the venture capital is coming in and they're trying to like increase the value of these teams. So like, we got to have the strong brand with the really well-recognized players, but it's not oftentimes decisions about the quality of the roster or the quality of the competitive roster. It's more about making the big announcement. You know what I mean? And that's just true.
True. I mean, at least from my perspective, a lot of it comes down to player development. And one thing that actually, during the last couple of months, I was speaking with a lot of GMs, both in NA and EU, and I think one thing that NA actually has that EU doesn't have as much is the fact that they actually have their academy players and staff within the same room, or not necessarily the same room, but in the same space. And I feel like if that was the case in EU, that would they would be able to elevate it even more. But so I don't have specific intel about like why it does not specifically work out, but I can just see from the outside that if you have so many players in the same building and you can't figure out how to develop these talents, then there has to be some kind of either a coaching issue.
It's a bigger issue, right?
Yeah. There has to be some issue within it, and yes. I'm not gonna sit here and be the expert of like this is exactly why it's not working. But sure. I think instead it's important to address the issues and then let the people that are actually working within it figure out, you know, like how can we actually make this better, or invest into people that can come in and give some new perspective on things. I think especially players, former players like myself are people that should be rated highly to figure out, you know, like how do we progress players, or how do we develop players? Because back when I started many years ago, we did not have tools to help us develop. You know, we just had to do it ourselves. We need to figure out just, you know, how do I become a better player? And nowadays there are just so much more infrastructure. But I mean, it does not matter how much infrastructure there is in the teams if they are not utilized, or if it doesn't bring any value. So I think that is a big thing, at least from my perspective on NA.
That's actually ridiculous, because you are right about that. Like, unlike Europe, where because teams are playing in ERLs, oftentimes those players don't even live in the same location. Like, they don't all go to Berlin like the LEC teams. Like, they live wherever they live in whatever countries they're in. They play online. Like, that's usually the case until in a normal year you have the offline finals of whatever, LFL, the UK League, etc. So yeah, I agree with you actually on that one, Cole. Technically, NA isn't even utilizing the advantages they have. Like, basically, their advantage in having similar teams in the same facility It's how Korea got ahead in the first fucking place in esports, is that you can practice internally in a way that some of it never has to leak to other teams because your own team's going to keep the secrets, hopefully. And also, you can ask them to practice in a specific way. So yeah, listen, the academy team isn't as good as your LCS team. That's obvious. But the point is you can do different types of practice with them. I actually do think that's mad under it. And that even ties in, by the way, to kind of the cultural, I'll say that aspect, that I know LS brought up recently, where he said, did you hear this, Monty? He said that basically he'd heard directly, like from the horse's mouth, as it were, that there was players in LCS who refused to scrim the academy team because they didn't want to potentially help develop those players that they saw as being their replacements in the future.
Happened.
Now, the reason why that's crazy to me is because everyone else took that on the surface level and they made it like this. Right, am I against the player doing that and is he an arsehole, or do I see the player's perspective? It's like, here's what I would say. Why is the player being consulted at all? You're like, that's like the guy who works at McDonald's being like, I'm not going to help train up this new guy. He might replace it. Who gives a fuck? Flip the burgers. I own the McDonald's. You just flip the burgers. Shut the fuck up. Like, in that scenario, what blows my mind about that is, why would the player even get a say in that? I'm your boss. You know that when I pay you 6 figures to play, you're playing this team now. Go ahead and do a good job. Like, the idea that the player can go, yeah, but that's not as good. Oh, so you're basically just like, disobedient then. You're just someone who just won't do what he's told to do, or you have better, like in that scenario, how is that defensible? Like, I'm not saying only practice against this bad player, never against good team. Obviously that would be ridiculous. That would be a waste of their time. We're talking about the occasional practice here, like throw them a bone, give them a scrim when you've got a free scrim. Like, the point that I'm making there is people don't get that it's still a systemic issue. Like, if I was actually in control of my org, not only is that a minor issue, like in that scenario, if that player complains, I would go and I would explain to him why part of what I'm paying him for isn't just to be the best at his role now, it's to help me develop my organization and establish a winning culture. And, you know, I need to train up this next guy because he's my academy ADC and I'm seeing where he's going to be in the future. And if he's not the future, I have to buy it. Like, if you can't get these conversations through as the owner, well, a guy on a fucking talk show isn't going to manage it, is it? Like, people need to actually start accepting responsibility all the way up the chain in here. Everyone at all levels needs to basically, the buck has to stop with them in their domain, you know?
It's also just ridiculous that the teams themselves haven't gotten together and figured out an actual feeder system, because remember that the feeder system in NA is Cloud9, basically, to this point in time. Look at how many players, like, you can't simultaneously tell me that there's no talent in NA and then all of the new players basically that have come through the system, like come into the scene, have somehow all gone through Cloud9. And then they trade them away to different teams, or they come from Cloud9's academy team or what have you. But there have been very few players who have reached full-time starting positions in the LCS in the last 3 years.
Basically,
that haven't come through Cloud9.
If LCS is a battery, you've got the two, well, I know what fucking term is, anode is at the end of the battery. You've got the two, anode and cathode. There's one, one of each. I remember, there we go, I'm remembering shit now from science, whatever. Chemistry class, it's all paying off 25 years later, right? So you've got the battery, that's the LCS. Obviously, the energy in the middle, that's the players, right? So you have Cloud9, they're the positive, they're introducing players, they're bringing fresh players to the scene. Then you have the other end, you have TSM, they take players that seem to be good, destroy them completely, and reintroduce them back into the bad, like, there's a cycle that continues to go here, guys. And that's why NA stays what it is.
Or TSM.
How you always make a point to
or you're TSM and you develop players like Tactical on your own academy team and then don't use them and send them to other teams.
Exactly. Yeah.
I also love that that TSM Academy is like just producing players that they refuse to use for some reason, even when they have distinct and obvious needs at those positions.